Have you ever found yourself drawn to desires that both fascinate and frighten you, urges you hide even from yourself? What if those feelings are not just random impulses, but messages from the deepest parts of your psyche, waiting to be understood rather than feared? And the sexual shadow is not some foreign force that invades the psyche. It is an inseparable part of it. It is built from the parts of the self that have been disowned, denied, or labeled unacceptable, not because they are inherently evil, but because they conflict with the image we were taught to hold of ourselves. From early on we learn what kinds of expressions are allowed and which are not. We're praised for modesty, restraint, and conformity, while curiosity, boldness, or certain types of desire are subtly or not so subtly shamed. So we bury them, not in the ground, but in the unconscious. And from that dark soil, the sexual shadow grows. This hidden aspect of ourselves contains all that we would rather not admit: forbidden fantasies, unspoken impulses, and erotic dreams that stand in direct opposition to the persona we present to the world. A person raised to believe in purity may find themselves plagued by intense desire. Another who prides themselves on being in control may feel overwhelmed by fantasies of submission. These contradictions do not make someone broken or immoral. They make them human. The psyche is vast and holds multitudes, but when we try to cut off pieces of it to appear good, those pieces do not die. They simply go underground, where they begin to operate from the shadows. What we repress sexually often has nothing to do with the external world and everything to do with the internal map we've constructed of right and wrong, good and bad, acceptable and shameful. This map is shaped by parents, culture, religion, and experience. The sexual shadow takes root wherever there is a split, where the conscious self says, "I must not be this," but the deeper self whispers, "This is also me." The dissonance between these voices creates an ongoing psychic tension, and instead of resolving it through awareness, most people silence the whisper and cling to the mask. This repression comes at a cost. The energy that is banished does not disappear. It seeks expression in indirect, often unconscious ways. It may manifest as compulsive behavior, obsessive fantasies, or rigid moral judgments projected onto others. The more we pretend the sexual shadow isn't there, the more it finds creative and often disruptive ways to remind us of its presence. It can sabotage relationships, distort attraction, and turn intimacy into a battlefield between who we are and who we think we should be. But the sexual shadow is not an enemy. It is the guardian of our wholeness. It holds not just shame, but also the keys to our creative life force, our authenticity, and our deepest capacity for connection. By exploring what we've exiled, we don't fall into chaos. We gain depth. We begin to see that our desires, however strange or uncomfortable, are messengers. They carry information about our unmet needs, our buried wounds, our longings for power, surrender, freedom, or love. These are not threats to our morality. They are aspects of our humanity. The problem arises not because we have a shadow, but because we refuse to look at it, and in refusing, we let it control us from behind the scenes. Only when we dare to turn toward it with curiosity, not condemnation, can we begin to reclaim the parts of ourselves that have been cut off. This reclamation is not about indulgence or chaos. It is about ownership. It is about acknowledging the full range of what it means to be a sexual, psychological, and spiritual being. In doing so, we move from fragmentation to integration, from shame to clarity, from unconscious reaction to conscious embodiment. The aspects of ourselves that provoke strong reactions, whether attraction, shame, or disgust, often serve as mirrors reflecting parts of our own sexual shadow. When you feel a sudden rush of jealousy toward someone's confidence or a pang of discomfort at another's boldness, these emotions are rarely just about the other person. Instead, they reveal something hidden within you, something you may have repressed or denied. These projections function as signals showing where your inner conflicts and desires lie buried. It is common to notice that the traits we judge harshly in others are the ones we struggle to accept in ourselves. For example, if someone feels repulsed by another person's overt sexuality or promiscuity, this may stem from a personal discomfort with similar impulses or desires. Rather than facing this internal conflict, the discomfort is displaced outward and focused on the other. This mechanism allows the conscious mind to maintain an image of morality or control, while the shadow aspects remain safely hidden. Yet the shadow does not stay silent. It makes itself known through these emotional reactions. Likewise, the qualities that draw us in strongly can reveal what we secretly long for or envy but feel forbidden to express. The magnetic pull towards someone's sensuality, confidence, or uninhibited nature may stir desires that clash with internalized rules or beliefs. This attraction can be thrilling and frightening at once because it awakens parts of ourselves we have tried to lock away. The tension arises because the shadow is neither purely good nor bad. It is a complex mix of light and darkness, strength and vulnerability. These reactions, whether repulsion or attraction, act like a compass, pointing us to the areas within ourselves that need acknowledgement. When ignored, they can lead to cycles of projection and blame. We may accuse others of being too much or not right, while unconsciously denying that these same energies live within us. This denial fragments the psyche, creating internal conflict and preventing true integration. The more we project, the more distant we become from a unified sense of self. It is essential to understand that recognizing these projections is not an admission of weakness or moral failure. On the contrary, it is a courageous act of self-awareness. By observing what triggers us, we can begin to uncover the stories we tell ourselves about who we are supposed to be versus who we actually are beneath the surface. The shame or fascination we feel is a doorway into a deeper understanding of our sexuality and identity. This process reveals the profound influence of social conditioning. Many of our judgments arise from cultural or familial messages about what sexual expression is acceptable or taboo. These messages create a rigid framework that excludes much of the natural diversity of human desire. When our own feelings fall outside these norms, we experience internal conflict that feeds into the shadow. The qualities we reject in others are often those parts of ourselves that have been deemed unacceptable by the world around us. The journey toward wholeness requires us to stop projecting and start owning these hidden parts. It means acknowledging that the qualities we dislike or envy in others may be fragments of our own nature waiting to be integrated. This does not mean acting out every impulse without reflection, but rather recognizing the presence of these energies and learning to engage with them consciously and responsibly. By embracing these mirrored aspects within ourselves, we dismantle the false divisions between good and bad desires, between acceptable and unacceptable selves. We reclaim our capacity for authenticity and creativity. We move from a place of judgment and fear to one of acceptance and curiosity. In doing so, the sexual shadow transforms from a source of conflict into a wellspring of insight and growth, illuminating the path toward deeper self-understanding and more meaningful relationships. When parts of our sexual nature are denied or pushed out of awareness, they do not simply vanish. Instead, they gain a hidden power over us. The more we try to suppress or ignore these forbidden desires and impulses, the stronger and more uncontrollable they become beneath the surface. This is the paradox of repression. By attempting to hide what we consider shameful or dangerous, we actually give those very aspects more influence over our thoughts, feelings, and actions. Suppression creates a pressure cooker effect within the psyche. Unacknowledged sexual energy accumulates and seeks release, often in ways that surprise or trouble us. This may show up as sudden outbursts of anger, compulsive behaviors, secret fantasies, or destructive patterns in relationships. Because the original feelings have been disowned, the person may not even recognize where these urges come from, leading to confusion and self-judgment. The shadow, in this sense, operates like a wild force in the unconscious, expressing itself indirectly through symptoms, rather than openly through conscious choice. Repression causes what is called projection, where we see in others the very traits we deny in ourselves. If a person has repressed desires or impulses, they may accuse others of being immoral, promiscuous, or deviant. This external judgment serves as a defense mechanism, keeping the uncomfortable feelings at bay by locating the problem outside rather than inside. But projection is a double-edged sword. It not only distorts our perception of others, but also deepens our alienation from ourselves. The shame that often accompanies sexual repression adds another layer of complexity. When society, family, or one's own conscience condemns certain desires, the individual internalizes this condemnation, which leads to self-loathing and secrecy. This shame pushes the sexual shadow further underground, intensifying its invisibility and, paradoxically, its power. The individual becomes trapped in a vicious cycle where shame fuels suppression and suppression feeds shame. This cycle can erode self-esteem and emotional well-being, sometimes manifesting in anxiety, depression, or addictive behaviors. It is important to understand that the sexual shadow is not inherently negative or destructive. Its power emerges only because it has been disowned and denied. Like a river dammed up behind a wall, sexual energy naturally seeks to flow. When blocked, it may overflow in unexpected ways, but when acknowledged and channeled, it can become a source of vitality, creativity, and deeper connection. The key lies in conscious awareness and integration rather than avoidance. Suppression also fragments the psyche, creating a divide between the conscious self and the hidden sexual self. This division leads to inner conflict, as the person struggles to maintain a public persona that contradicts their private reality. The tension between these opposing forces can be exhausting and destabilizing. Relationships often suffer, as the person may either hide their true desires or act them out in ways that feel disconnected from their authentic self. This dissonance prevents true intimacy, because intimacy requires honesty and acceptance of the whole person, including the shadow. Working with the sexual shadow means gently lifting the repression, rather than forcing or indulging the shadow blindly. It involves bringing unconscious desires into the light of conscious reflection, understanding their origins, and discerning which aspects can be expressed healthily and ethically. This process requires patience, self-compassion, and sometimes professional guidance, as confronting the shadow can awaken fears and vulnerabilities. When repression loses its grip, the sexual shadow loses its secret power to control us from the depths. It becomes a known part of the self, accessible and understandable rather than mysterious and frightening. This integration brings balance and peace. The person no longer needs to hide or deny, but can live with greater authenticity and freedom. In this way, what was once a source of turmoil becomes a wellspring of strength, a vital part of a fully embodied and conscious life. Facing the sexual shadow is often misunderstood as an indulgence in forbidden desires or an excuse to act out impulses without restraint. In truth, engaging with this hidden part of ourselves is neither about surrendering to every craving nor rejecting moral responsibility. It is, instead, a profound journey toward integration, a process of bringing the unconscious into consciousness, so that we can understand, accept, and transform what has been hidden. This kind of work requires honesty, courage, and a willingness to sit with discomfort, rather than fleeing into denial or repression. When people hear about the sexual shadow, they sometimes imagine it as a dark, dangerous force that must be unleashed or suppressed, but the truth is more subtle. The sexual shadow represents aspects of ourselves that we have disowned, often because they clash with social norms, personal values, or internalized messages about what is acceptable. These parts may contain fears, desires, fantasies, and impulses that we find confusing or unsafe. To engage with the sexual shadow is to meet these parts without judgment, to listen to what they have to say, and to discern their place within the whole self. This process is not about acting on every impulse. It is about recognizing what lies beneath the impulse, the unmet need, the hurt, the longing. For example, a person might feel an urge toward a particular fantasy that, on the surface, seems shocking or unacceptable. Rather than dismissing it outright or feeling ashamed, shadow work invites a deeper inquiry. What does this fantasy reveal about their inner world? Does it point to a desire for freedom, control, intimacy, or escape? By understanding the meaning behind the impulse, the person can choose how to relate to it consciously rather than being driven unconsciously by it. Integration of the sexual shadow also means accepting that sexuality is complex and multifaceted. It is not simply a matter of good or bad, right or wrong. Our desires can be contradictory, fluid, and sometimes paradoxical. To deny this complexity is to deny part of our humanity. The sexual shadow reminds us that beneath the polished surface of our public selves lies a richer, messier interior landscape. To engage with this landscape with curiosity and respect is to reclaim the fullness of our being. Working with the sexual shadow requires ethical reflection. Integration does not mean abandoning discernment or responsibility. It means bringing awareness to how our desires affect ourselves and others. It involves making conscious choices that honor both our truth and the boundaries necessary for healthy relationships. This balance between authenticity and accountability is essential. The sexual shadow, when integrated, can become a source of vitality and creativity, rather than confusion or harm. There is also a healing aspect to this work. Many elements of the sexual shadow are wounded parts, expressions of past trauma, fear, or neglect that have been folded into desire. By facing these wounds honestly, we create space for healing. The energy once trapped in shame or repression can be freed and transformed. This transformation often leads to deeper self-love and acceptance, allowing a person to move toward more authentic and fulfilling relationships. The journey into the sexual shadow is not linear or easy. It often involves confronting discomfort, uncertainty, and resistance. We may meet fears that have long been buried, or parts of ourselves we have denied for years. But it is precisely in this courageous facing that growth happens. Each encounter with the shadow is an opportunity to reclaim lost parts of ourselves and to step into a more integrated and embodied existence. Ultimately, the sexual shadow is not a curse, but a doorway, an invitation to expand our understanding of who we are beyond the surface. It challenges us to live more honestly, to embrace complexity, and to bring light into the hidden corners of our psyche. This process of integration transforms what was once feared or hidden into a wellspring of strength, creativity, and authentic connection. It is through this integration that we find true freedom, not from desire itself, but from the unconscious forces that have long controlled it. Beneath the surface of many forbidden desires and shadowy fantasies lie deeper emotional wounds and unmet needs that have been hidden or ignored. These wounds shape the contours of our sexual shadow, coloring the way we experience desire and intimacy. Often, what appears as a taboo or dark fantasy is less about the act itself and more about a yearning for something profoundly human: connection, acceptance, safety, or healing. Understanding this hidden dimension reveals why the sexual shadow can feel so compelling and difficult to face. Many of us carry emotional scars from childhood experiences, relationships, or social conditioning that have left parts of us feeling rejected, abandoned, or misunderstood. These wounds create a hunger for validation and intimacy that is often expressed indirectly through the sexual shadow. For instance, a person may find themselves drawn to fantasies or behaviors that symbolize control or submission because, at a deeper level, they seek to repair a sense of powerlessness or vulnerability. The sexual shadow thus becomes a language for the soul's unmet needs, encoded in symbols and impulses rather than direct expression. Because these wounds are rarely conscious, they manifest through layers of projection and denial. A person might be ashamed or frightened by certain desires, not because the desires themselves are inherently harmful, but because they touch on painful areas that have not been healed. The shadow holds these impulses in tension, making them both alluring and terrifying. This tension can create confusion, guilt, or shame, pushing the individual further into repression or secretive behavior, which only intensifies the internal conflict. The relationship between emotional wounds and the sexual shadow also explains why some patterns in sexuality feel repetitive or compulsive. When the underlying needs remain unmet, the shadow keeps resurfacing in similar forms, seeking resolution. This repetition is not a failure of willpower, but a signal that something deeper requires attention. The sexual shadow calls us to look beyond the surface of desire and explore the emotional context that shapes it. It is important to recognize that these wounds and longings are universal aspects of the human experience. No one is immune to the effects of pain, loss, or longing, and the sexual shadow is one way these experiences find expression. This universality can bring a sense of compassion and reduce the isolation that often accompanies shame around sexuality. When we see the shadow as part of a larger human story of seeking wholeness, we create space for healing and growth. Healing the wounds beneath the sexual shadow requires more than simply changing behavior. It involves acknowledging the pain and unmet needs that fuel the shadow's power. This may mean revisiting difficult memories, exploring feelings of abandonment or rejection, or challenging internalized messages that have shaped one's relationship to sexuality and self-worth. Such work often requires patience and support, as the layers of defense and shame can be deep. As these wounds begin to heal, the sexual shadow loses its hold as a chaotic or destructive force. Desires that were once secretive or overwhelming become clearer and more manageable. The individual gains the capacity to express sexuality in ways that are authentic, respectful, and fulfilling. The shadow, rather than being a source of conflict, becomes integrated into a richer, more nuanced sense of self. This process also opens the door to deeper intimacy with others. When the wounds beneath the shadow are acknowledged and cared for, the barriers to genuine connection diminish. Relationships can move beyond surface attraction to include emotional safety, vulnerability, and mutual understanding. The shadow's hidden messages, once deciphered, become guides to the emotional healing necessary for true closeness. Ultimately, beneath the sexual shadow lies a profound truth. Our desires are intertwined with our deepest human needs. By attending to the wounds and yearnings that shape our sexual selves, we step into a fuller expression of love and connection. This awareness transforms the shadow from a source of fear and shame into a pathway toward healing and wholeness. The journey of confronting the sexual shadow leads inevitably to a transformation in how we experience intimacy and relationships. When we have not faced the hidden parts of our sexuality, our connections with others often remain shallow, fraught with misunderstanding, or driven by unconscious impulses. The sexual shadow can create barriers, walls of fear, shame, or secrecy that prevent genuine closeness. But when we begin to integrate the shadow, it reshapes our relational landscape, inviting a deeper, more authentic form of intimacy. Integration of the sexual shadow allows us to see ourselves and others more clearly, beyond the masks we wear and the roles we play. Many relationships are built on projections, where we unconsciously expect others to fulfill the parts of ourselves we reject or cannot access. For example, if a person has denied their own desires for freedom or passion, they may be attracted to someone who embodies those traits, only to feel conflicted or threatened by that very presence. This dynamic creates tension and misunderstanding as the relationship becomes a battleground between conscious needs and unconscious fears. As we bring the sexual shadow into awareness, these projections lessen. We start to recognize that the qualities we've been drawn to or repelled by in others reflect aspects of ourselves. This recognition fosters empathy and reduces judgment, both toward ourselves and those we love. Instead of blaming partners for our discomfort or dissatisfaction, we take responsibility for the internal dynamics we bring to the relationship. This shift is foundational for developing true intimacy, which requires vulnerability and acceptance. Embracing the sexual shadow enriches the emotional texture of our relationships. It invites us to communicate more honestly about desires, boundaries, and fears. When the shadow remains unconscious, communication is limited and misunderstandings proliferate. People may avoid discussing their true feelings out of shame or fear of rejection, but integration encourages openness, making it possible to share not only what is easy or socially acceptable, but also what is complex, contradictory, or difficult. This process can be challenging, as it demands courage to be seen fully, including the parts that have been hidden or judged. However, the reward is profound. Relationships rooted in shadow integration become spaces of healing and growth, where partners support each other in becoming whole. They allow for the expression of sexuality that is not simply about physical pleasure, but also about emotional connection and mutual respect. Integration also transforms the way we handle conflict and desire within relationships. The sexual shadow often fuels jealousy, insecurity, or power struggles when left unexamined. But as these unconscious drivers come into light, they lose their grip. Individuals gain greater emotional resilience and the ability to navigate complex feelings without resorting to defense or control. This maturity deepens trust and fosters a sense of safety that is essential for lasting intimacy. At a broader level, integrating the sexual shadow challenges societal taboos and the binary thinking that divides good from bad desires. It invites a more nuanced understanding of human sexuality as a spectrum of experiences that are natural and deserving of respect. This awareness can reduce the stigma and shame that isolate individuals, promoting healthier, more compassionate communities. Ultimately, the integration of the sexual shadow transforms not only personal relationships, but also how we relate to ourselves. It cultivates self-acceptance and self-love by acknowledging the full range of our sexuality without judgment. This inner harmony radiates outward, enabling us to connect with others from a place of authenticity and wholeness, rather than fear or fragmentation. Through this integration, intimacy evolves from a fragile state of vulnerability into a dynamic exchange of trust, passion, and mutual understanding. The sexual shadow, once a source of conflict and secrecy, becomes a bridge to deeper connection and fulfillment. It reveals that the path to genuine intimacy is not through perfection or repression, but through embracing the entirety of our sexual and emotional selves. The sexual shadow is not a force to be conquered or cast away, but a vital part of our inner world that holds the key to greater self-awareness and authentic connection. By facing the hidden desires, fears, and wounds beneath the surface, we move beyond denial and repression toward integration and healing. This journey demands courage and honesty, but it also offers profound freedom. The freedom to accept ourselves fully, to communicate more openly, and to experience intimacy that is richer and more genuine. When we stop projecting and start embracing the fullness of our sexuality, we transform not only our relationships with others, but our relationship with ourselves. In that transformation lies the path to wholeness, where desire becomes a source of vitality, creativity, and deep human connection.